A lot of people live with a quiet sense that they should be further along by now. More clear, more settled, more complete. And because of that, life can seem like a perpetual movement toward a future version of yourself. A version that will finally feel more finished than the current one does. And the strange thing is, even while real progress is occurring, that feeling often doesn't disappear. Goals change. Standards change. The next version of you replaces the previous one. But the feeling of not quite arriving still remains. So the question is, why does the experience of being unfinished survive in spite of all the effort, insight, and improvement? Many people spend a surprising amount of their lives moving toward a future version of themselves. A version that will be more confident, more capable, more clear, more complete. The details vary from person to person, but the structure is often similar. There's a current version of yourself, and there's a future version that feels somehow preferable, a version that seems closer to how you should be. And because that version appears desirable, it becomes a natural destination, something to move toward, something to become. And so attention turns toward improvement, learning, growth, correction, the effort to close the gap between who you are and who you think you should be. And for a while, this process can feel productive. Progress happens. Changes occur. Certain problems become less significant. You become more experienced, more knowledgeable, more capable in various ways. Yet something interesting often remains unchanged. The feeling that you're still not quite there, still not quite finished, still not quite complete. And because that feeling persists, a familiar conclusion often follows. There must still be more work to do. Another adjustment, another insight, another improvement. Something else must still be missing. So the movement continues towards the next future version of yourself. The next stage, the next level of understanding, the next improvement that finally resolves what remains unfinished. But over time, a question begins to emerge. Why does the feeling of being unfinished survive so many improvements? Why does it persist despite genuine progress? Because of improvement, we're gradually eliminating this problem. There should eventually be a point reached where the experience changes. A point where you no longer experience yourself as incomplete. A point where this project reaches some conclusion. But for many people, that point never clearly arrives. Instead, the work changes. But that sense of not still being there often remains. And when that happens, something else becomes visible. The horizon simply moves. You reach one milestone, and it's gradually replaced with another. You solve one problem, and attention gradually shifts towards a different area of your life. You become the person you once thought you needed to become in some respect, and then a new standard quietly takes its place. So what looked like movement toward completion begins to feel more like movement toward horizon. You keep approaching it, but it keeps receding. The new version of yourself replaces the previous one. A new standard emerges, a new target appears, and the experience of not yet being there continues. Not necessarily because progress is absent, but because completion itself keeps being relocated into the future. And when that orientation becomes established, something subtle can happen. You begin relating to yourself based on difference. The difference between where you are and where you think you should be. The difference between who you are and who you're trying to become. The difference between the present state and the imagined future that you believe will finally resolve everything. And when attention repeatedly returns to those differences, the sense of feeling unfinished can become remarkably stable. Not because you never improve, but because each improvement generates a new version of completion to pursue. And so the feeling of not yet quite being there survives. And if ordinary unease continues to be interpreted as evidence that something still needs correction, then the feeling of being unfinished can persist indefinitely. The feeling appears. Another target emerges. Another version of yourself becomes the destination. And so the project continues. Not because you're failing yourself, not because you're incapable, but because the process itself keeps recreating the very experience it's trying to eliminate, the experience of being incomplete. And once this pattern becomes visible, it raises a new possibility. Perhaps the question is not, how do I finally become complete? Perhaps the question is, what if this feeling of being unfinished is being produced by the way I'm relating to myself? Because if that's a possibility, then perhaps this process is not moving towards completion at all, but is continually recreating the need for that completion. And that's something we'll definitely continue to explore together.